Welcome to this episode of Truth on Wheels. I am Don Blackwell. I am your host, and we're glad you joined us today. I have a guest with me today, and this is Luke Griffin. Luke is the director of Polishing the Pulpit, and you've been doing that for how long, Luke?
22 years.
22 years. You've been with House to House for
22 years.
22 years. And Luke is also one of the elders at the East Ridge Church of Christ in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And how long have you been an elder at East Ridge?
Just over a year.
Oh, just over a year. Okay.
So, new elder still.
A new elder. All right. Well, very good. We are glad to have you on the program. Luke and I have been friends for a long time. I don't know how many years, maybe 15 years. But love and appreciate Luke for his soundness and the work that he does. And we're honored to have him on the program today. We're going to be talking about a question today that actually was assigned to me at Polishing the Pulpit this year, and I thought it would be a good study for us to discuss. The question is, does the church need to make our youth events look like a concert atmosphere in order to keep our youth from leaving the church? Very important question, and it's a relevant question. And Luke, the truth is that some of our youth events look less like gatherings of God's people and more like rock concerts or a New Year's celebration or a Hollywood debut or something like that. Have you observed that as well?
We have, yeah, and we've gone to a couple and we've had to leave them because as they're entering into worship, sometimes it's almost like like you said, a rock concert. Like, are you ready to worship? And they're trying to get them pumped up and enthusiastic and emotional. That's
okay.
What it seems like.
Well, this is something we need to talk about because it's an issue. It's something that's different. It's new. So I want to begin this discussion by an article that I ran across. It's an article by a denominational man, but it's called "The Rise of Churchtainment When Worship Became a Product." Now, again, the man who wrote this is not a member of the Church of Christ, and the article's not specifically about youth events. It's about worship, but there's a lot of overlap here with what we're going to talk about. I'm going to read some of this article, and then there's going to be excerpts from it in our discussion today. But here's how the article begins. He says, "We thought that fog machines and clever sermon series would reach the lost, but it's the church that's gone missing." He says, "I've been in a lot of church services over the years. Some left me trembling at the holiness of God. Others felt like I'd stumbled into a Broadway warm-up act, complete with moving lights, motivational monologues, and a countdown clock flashing on a 60-foot LED wall. Somewhere along the line, we stopped calling it worship and started calling it, quote, an experience. The sanctuary became a stage. The preacher became a performer, and reverence quietly left the building. What replaced it wasn't ministry, it was marketing." And then he says it didn't happen all at once. Like most compromises, it was gradual, a little more flash here, a little less Bible there, until eventually the church wasn't forming Christians anymore, it was managing customers. The goal used to be honoring God, then it became about growing attendance, then about retaining it. That's when entertainment crept in. Somewhere between seeker-sensitive and purpose-driven, churches were handed a lie, that the way to reach people is to look as little like the church as possible, and we bought it. He says we traded the weight of glory for the haze of fog machines. Reverence was sacrificed on the altar of relevance. We didn't contextualize the gospel, we compromised it. Now, we're going to talk about this and why it would be a problem to have the youth events look like concerts.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting that they say, okay, well, so we're losing our kids to the world. That's what it looks like. And so let's take things from the world and let's add that to the church. And that seems to be the philosophy. And that if we can make it fun and entertaining, then we'll hold on to them.
That's a very good point. I hadn't thought of it that way, but excellent. When I was given this assignment, I thought this is kind of challenging because when you consider this, number one, a youth event is not worship, but there's certainly some overlapping. So I came up with 4 words to help analyze this. And the first word is the word confusing. I think this blurs the lines in people's minds. I don't know where I found this quote, but I saved it in my computer. In our day, the line between worship and entertainment has been significantly blurred. So determined are some churches to draw audiences by mixing entertainment with their religious event that they will advertise their activities as entertainment or edutainment. Tacit, though perhaps unwitting, evidence of their compromise with the flesh. And I thought that was a pretty good description, that we have turned worship into entertainment because we want to appeal to the flesh. This blurs the lines. Would you agree with this statement he's made?
I do, and I like to think of it like you take a look at what is a visitor who doesn't know anything about our worship, and they come, maybe they've invited them to one of these events, the other youth, and they come to this event, and they're going to take a look at it, and they're seeing all these things and all this edutainment or whatever you want to call it. And like you say, blurring the line, confusing. Where does worship start, and where does the entertainment part, really end?
Yeah.
And then to me, and this is a vital point to me, is if you had a visitor and they came to one of these and they said, "Oh, that was a lot of fun. I think I'll go to church on Sunday morning with them," and they come to worship service, what's that going to look like? That's very confusing to
That's
them.
right.
Is why did they have rock music and light shows and all these things before the worship part of the youth event? But we've got none of that when we go to worship on Sunday morning.
That's right.
So it's whiplash. It's making them not understand what's going on. So it's confusing. It's confusing to a visitor. It's also confusing to our people.
Yeah. Under this heading of confusing, a few years ago, the congregation where I was preaching sent our young people, I think it was our college age, to a youth event. And when the chaperones got there, they were surprised and disturbed. In fact, they left. And they sent me a video of the event. And at the time, I sat down and wrote some notes. And when I got this assignment, I went back and I found I had those notes. But the entire atmosphere had a kind of a concert vibe. And this is what I wrote at the time. The room was dark, lights were swirling, dramatic music. The stage was backlit with video footage of snow falling. There was screaming and cheering as the speaker entered the stage. It reminded me of a rock concert. It was rock concert-esque, to coin a new word there. But every atmosphere is designed with something in mind. We either design it to communicate respect or fun or rebellion or whatever it is. We've got something in mind when we design an atmosphere. And that particular atmosphere did not seem to be focused on spiritual or godly things.
Right.
It was typical of fleshly, worldly desires and appetites, things that are associated with entertainment. And it bothered me. The point is confusing. It bothered me because it mixed these things or intertwined these things with worship. And so you've got strong emotional music and you've got a light show followed immediately by prayer and congregational praise to God and song. Now, they did say, stop now. We're going to move on and we're going to do worship. But that sudden switch, that's what I'm talking about. It blurs the lines. What is worship and what is not worship?
Right. And who's the audience and who are we doing this for? It's supposed to be for God, and
Right.
there's supposed to be reverence involved, but it feels to me like they're trying to play on emotion, and there's just no substance there.
Well, it's a
There's
good
no
point
foundation.
because who are we appealing to? The entertainment part supposed to appeal to the individual. Then we stop and say, okay, now let's turn our attention to God. So it's just kind of back and forth.
Right.
And if there were no worship involved, I think this would strike me differently. Because, but that's the problem. It blurs the boundaries in the hearts and minds of young people, for older people too. And imagine the effect that that's going to have on the mind of a new convert.
Right. Or a visitor. And to me, too, I've heard this argument many times where they say, well, that's not really worship. But you are worshiping as well. Like, we're singing praises to God, we're praying, we're oftentimes there's a message, a lesson, a preacher.
Yeah.
And you are worshiping. It may not be a Sunday worship service.
Yeah.
But if you want to put it this way, the rules of worship still apply to those worship sections.
Well, it made me think how many times over the years I've been in a worship service, and before we partook of the Lord's Supper, the person presiding at the table would say something like this: "Now, to prepare our minds for the Lord's Supper, let's sing this song."
Right.
And what he was saying is we've got to focus our minds and get in that mindset for worship. How different is that from saying, let's play the rock music, let's have the lights, the smoke, the fog, whatever. Okay, now let's worship. It's the opposite of that.
Well, and I've even seen where they do some kind of transition. So they're playing rock or country music, then they'll show a video with instrumental music backing and this booming voice about how wonderful God is. Now we're kind of entering into a worship time period, and then somebody's going to get on stage and introduce that. And it just, like you said, it seems like a show.
Yeah. Now, we talked about this, communicated a little bit before we started the program. Where did this start? What is the roots of this?
So I was thinking about that, and I think 10 to 15 years ago, and it probably happened before that, but I started noticing there was a lot of talk around the church, even articles being published and even books being published and lessons being given on, we've got to change to meet the needs of young people. And the church is just not doing that. Everything's been okay for almost 2,000 years, but now there's a new generation, and they didn't have the internet, and they didn't have these things, and so we've got to change for the millennials, and then since then subsequent generations. But it's, to me, my first reaction to that was very negative. My thought is, no, we don't need to change the church. The church is distinctive.
Right.
And I think about it, it's the bride of Christ.
Right.
And, both of us have brides, both of us are married.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want somebody coming up and saying, you know what, your wife just really needs to change. And, she really needs to lose some weight or do her hair differently. And, she's just not as attractive as she used to be. And Jesus doesn't want that for his bride. Jesus set the rules and the laws for the church. He set up worship. He set up reverence. He set those things for us. And so that was my first reaction to that. But they come at this and they say things like, well, the lessons are too long, or there's just boring sections. The Lord's Supper just takes too long and it's boring. And so we've got to, they have shorter attention spans. We've got to change the church. And I'm just very negatively react to it then. And to me, the church is distinctive.
Yeah.
And they're seeing these things in the world, and they're trying to make excuses for why we're losing our children.
I was doing some reading, and it said in the 80s and 90s, things were changing in the denominational world, and it got to the point where success was measured not by faithfulness, but by size. And that has certainly bled over into the Lord's church. And the pulpit has become more like a motivational seminar than the preaching of the gospel. And people say, well, it draws numbers, it draws people, but the circus draws numbers.
Yeah.
And Paul said in 2 Timothy 4:3-4, the time will come that they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, their own lust, because they have itching ears, because they want to have their ears tickled. They will heap to themselves, they'll gather up teachers who will turn away their ears from the truth and be turned unto fables. In other words, the time's going to come, they don't want to hear the truth. Right. They don't want to hear just doctrine. They want to hear things that tickle their ears, that are fun, that are entertaining.
There's just no staying power to that. And and I know many people, everybody is going to go through difficult times. Your faith is going to be tested. And if your faith is based on this shallow, borrowed faith, a weak faith, a fake faith, when those difficult times come, there's no roots there to hold you. There's nothing there to support you. And I think about 1 Peter 4, verse 1, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same purpose. You know, since I've become an elder, you think more about feeding the flock, equipping the saints. How are we arming our children? Mm-hmm. Well, the only weapon God gives us is the Scripture. It's the sword of the Spirit. And that's what we need to be building the foundation on.
Yeah.
So to me, that's what's vital, is we're giving our children good roots, our young people.
And take what you're saying, and if you go back to 2 Timothy 4, they turn away their ears from doctrine, and they're turned into fables. And so I would say that time is now. What Paul said was going to happen, and it's not the only time, but it certainly is true now. Many congregations have rejected doctrine outright. Some would say, well, we haven't rejected it, but many have stopped serving meat and they've started serving dessert, so to speak. But sugar-fed churches will not strengthen God's people. Now, again, somebody might say, but you know, this is a youth event. This is not the church, but we don't need to feed our youth sugar. We don't need to feed our youth with lights and fog machines. Why are we going to have a spiritual event and then give them nothing except entertainment?
That's right.
It's confusing.
It's confusing.
Right. Here's the second word. It's inadequate, or maybe you can say insufficient. And the idea is this. In fact, I'll give this illustration. My wife Sherry and I were watching TV. We were watching Angel TV one night, and we saw a program come on called The House of David. And it's the story of King David. And in this, at the beginning of it, they said something like this: some liberties have been taken in the biblical account. And boy, that's an understatement, because you can hardly recognize some of it. But anyway, we were watching the account of David and Goliath, and David begins running toward Goliath, and it's impressive. It's amazing. And so as he's running, all of a sudden Goliath throws a spear, and he pierces David to the ground, and David he's on the ground and he's bleeding. And then they pan the soldiers of Israel, and you see the panic on their face and the tense music, and you think, oh no, it's over, it's too late. And then David opens his eyes and he jumps up and he goes running at Goliath. And if you are thinking, I don't remember that in the Bible.
I don't, yeah.
It's because it's not in the Bible.
Right.
They made it up. And I looked at Sherry and I said, what in the world?
Yeah.
Did they think that the Bible story was inadequate? I mean, perhaps the greatest warrior story in all of history, and they said, that's not good enough.
Yeah.
It's insufficient. We need to make it better. We need to make it more exciting. What in the world have we come to as a society when we think we need more than that? And it reminds me of this. When I think about what we have as God's people, and we think, no, we need to add lights. We need to add a fog machine. We need to have some dramatic music, because what the Lord's given us is not enough. Am I making a valid comparison here, do you think?
I think so, yeah. And I think about, Polishing the Pulpit, which certainly we have a stage, and there are lights on the stage. But nobody, I don't think, comes away from Polishing the Pulpit talking about the great light show or smoke machines or anything like that we have, fog machines. What people usually walk away talking about is the wonderful singing, the congregational singing. And to me, that's such an encouragement to places. I grew up in small churches, and we didn't have very good singing, good song leaders, that kind of thing. And so you go to something like Polishing the Pulpit with 3,000 or 4,000 people singing, raising their voice to God in praise. It's edifying. It builds us up. It helps encourage us. And so to me, that's what worship is partially about. Is yes, there's an aspect of worship where we're edifying and encouraging each other. But there's also, of course, the aspect that it's worship to God. And it's deeper. Like you say, it's inefficient, or not inefficient, inadequate, insufficient.
Yeah.
And that's, it's just there's no substance to what they're doing here.
Yeah. We
want that good soil to get deep roots, so that when the tough times come, they've got that foundation. The foundation has to be on Christ. Jesus makes that point at the end of the sermon, the greatest sermon ever, the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 7, where that's the foundation. It has to be on the rock.
In fact, thinking about that, Jesus said himself in John 12:32, "And if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto me." That is the greatest draw of all time.
That's right.
That's all we need.
That's right.
We don't need lights and fog machines. We're implying that it's insufficient.
Right.
Number one, this is confusing. Number two, we're saying what we have is not enough. Christianity is about the heart.
That's right.
It's not about lights and about fog machines. I am saying that what we have is sufficient. The gospel is the power of God unto salvation. Luke, if the message of the crucifixion is not enough, then we're mixed up. Something is severely wrong. God has put the desire in the heart of all men to worship Him. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says He's made everything beautiful in its time. He's put eternity in their hearts. That implies that God has made an awareness of the eternal nature of humanity. There's an inner pull in us to think about eternity and to think about God. And Christ is the message that directs us toward eternity. But what we're saying is, well, we need some more. And so, number one, this is confusing. Number two, it implies that it's inadequate. Let me ask you the question, though. What do you think? What's the motivation for this?
I think that there are three motivations. I don't think they're all bad. I think oftentimes the motivation is something good, like we see that our young people are leaving the church. They go to college and they leave the church, or they get in with a group of friends and they leave the church. We want to make an attractive alternative to what the world is offering. So we take pieces of the world. Look, sin is fun, right? So we try to take the pieces that aren't sinful, that are fun, and we try to make an attractive alternative to what the world is offering. But there's already a great alternative to what the world is offering. The church is distinctive, and we don't need to take these, what amounts to denominational pieces, and try to add them to the church or to worship. Yeah. And in fact, what we're finding is some of these big denominational preachers, they go down this path, and then they find that there's nothing at the end of that path. And they're starting to say, hey, I think I'm wrong on some of this stuff. And we see that happening. I've seen the discussion. So I think that's the first motivation. I think the second motivates a lot of people, and that's money. And you think about, why is it tough for a Christian university to stay sound? Well, it's because they're not tied to the structure of the church. They're not under an eldership. Typically, it's under a board, and people have different qualifications for being on a board than there are qualifications for being an elder. Then also, they've got to meet criteria in order to continue to offer degree programs. They've got to have accreditation. And so there's a lot of motivations and money. They've got to keep that all going. It's hard for them to stay sound because they're trying to please the world.
Right.
And that leads to the third motivation, which I see a lot, is this popularity or ego problem. And we see this is boosted by almost like trying to achieve a celebrity status for a preacher. We see these big pastors or whatever they are, youth leaders in the world. They get a huge YouTube following or following on TikTok, and we say we need to tap into that market. We've got to have that brand, and then they're feeding their ego. They're posting pictures of themselves. They're naming things after themselves. It's magnifying themselves. Well, who are we supposed to be magnifying?
Yeah,
it's Jesus, and so those are the three motivations I see for it. They're not all bad. We want to keep our children in the church, but sometimes we let these other things creep in to our thinking.
So the first word is confusing. When you mix entertainment and worship, it's going to be confusing, especially to young people. Secondly is the idea that what we have is inadequate. And in fact, I mentioned the article at the beginning. That article says Churchtainment has a cost. It has produced biblical illiteracy. People know the preacher's catchphrases, but not Paul's epistles. It has created shallow servants with believers who are emotionally moved, but not spiritually anchored. When the church builds itself on entertainment, it raises spectators, not saints. When we raise our children that way, it's not just a bad strategy, it is spiritual sabotage. And he says it well. So number one is confusing. Number two is inadequate. Number three, I want to suggest the word carnal. Where I'm an elder at the Cookeville Church of Christ, we bought our church building from a denominational group. And when we first went in to see the building, when we first toured it, there's a large stage. And over on the side, there was a big plexiglass section. And inside that plexiglass, they had instruments and drums and guitars. And across the whole back wall, there was this giant, huge screen, ceiling to floor. And we were told it cost tens of thousands. In fact, they told us something like, we'll cut you a deal if you want to buy it. We'll sell it to you for $40,000 or $50,000. And we thought, well, we can get a pull-down screen for like $200. But anyway, they said you can have a background on there, scenery of mountains, or if you're preaching about Christ, you can have Golgotha back there. And the walls were painted black like a movie theater. They had lights on the ceiling that could do different colors. They could swirl around. They had spotlights and some killer speakers. And here's my point. It was all designed to appeal to the physical senses. It was focused on the external and carnal manipulation.
Yeah.
And that's what I see these concert-like environments appealing to. It's carnal in its appeal and its nature.
It's all geared to make an emotional response.
Yeah.
And when you have an emotional response to something, there's no staying power to it. You know, we have to worship in spirit and in truth. We have to be engaged, certainly. Yeah. And our spirit has to be engaged in that way. But it can't be all spirit, all emotion, and no truth.
Yeah.
That's the key. It has to have both.
Let me go back to this guy's article. I keep referencing it, but it's good. He says, we've traded reverence for relevance, and now we're reaping what we sowed. Worship used to be marked by awe. Hebrews 12:28 and 29 reminds us to offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. But now the average Sunday, quote, experience wouldn't recognize reverence if it walked in wearing a name tag and carrying a Bible. There's an entire generation growing up in churches that don't know what it's like to worship with the lights on and a hymnal in their hands and with the clear, sacred sense that they've entered the presence of God. Instead, they've been shaped by LED stage lights, emotional buildups, branding masquerading as reverence. Many preachers have become more concerned with mood and momentum and marketability than with clarity, conviction, and Christ. The sermons sound more like TED Talks with the sprinkle of Jesus, and in the process, we've lost our worship. Now, again, somebody might think, well, that's not churches of Christ, Don, but the door is cracked in some congregations, and I think at these youth events, the door is wide open.
You know, I think about the Old Testament and the vessels in the temple, and we're supposed to be like that. We're sanctified. That is, we're washed and set aside for a holy purpose. And you look at the vessels in the temple were the same way. They were sanctified for use in the temple. Well, what happened when you took those out of the temple and you used them for pagan feasts? Well, ask Nebuchadnezzar how that went. Mm-hmm. Or what happened if you brought something in from outside that wasn't sanctified? Well, ask Nadab and Abihu about that. It doesn't go well when you take sanctified things and you use them for something else, or you bring something unsanctified in. Now, we're not in the Old Testament,
right,
but the comparison there is we are the sanctified vessels. Yeah. And so we've got to be used for God's purpose. And there's a seriousness to that. There's a sobriety to that, a soberness. And we've got to keep that in focus in order to have reverence. We talk about reverence a lot of times when we talk about how we dress for worship. And I'm not really talking about that. I'm just talking about reverence for God and God's plan.
Yeah.
We've got to take that very seriously.
Yeah.
And how we're affecting the church.
Hold that thought, because I want to come back to that reverence thought in just a minute, because I've got a note about that.
Okay.
You talked about going back to the Old Testament. People have always been infatuated with wanting to be stimulated visually and auditorily and entertaining and carnal, and they want to mix that with worship. And my mind went back to the Old Testament. I think about Exodus 19 and 20. The children of Israel have come out of Egypt. They've crossed the Red Sea. They're at Mount Sinai, and God calls the elders of the people together. And of course, he's on the mountain, and it's thundering. And the people said, Moses said, obey the Lord. And they said, all that the Lord has said we will do. And God appears to them in thunder and fire and smoke. And he says, thou shalt have no other gods before thee. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor worship them. And they said, we will. We'll obey the Lord. 40 days later, in Exodus 32, they're melting down their jewelry because they're trying to make an idol to worship. They're playing music and they're dancing. They're mixing in the carnal. They're bringing in the music. They're getting caught up in the fleshly carnal, and they're incorporating it into their worship. Now, somebody might say, Don, are you trying to equate our worship events to worshiping idols? No, that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is the draw should not be fleshly, carnal, physical, and fun. But people constantly want to try to stir feelings with shallow, artificial stimuli. That's why you see people bringing in things like waving their arms and turning on the lights and having powerful instrumental music pieces, and they're cheap substitutes. Right. They're kind of like narcotics for the addict. And I see people do this with regard to the Holy Spirit. They'll turn the lights down and they play the music, and they'll raise the music up, and that music has an emotional stimulation, and they'll say, do you feel the Spirit? You feel the Spirit? They don't feel the Spirit. They're feeling the effects of the emotions and the music.
Didn't you have a good worship experience?
Yeah,
that's what it seems like.
That's the buzzword, is the experience. Now again, somebody might argue and say, but this is a youth event. It's not worship. This is just about fun. But a friend of mine said, if you draw people with popcorn, you have to keep them with popcorn. And again, we're blurring the lines. And so you come in, you've got a countdown. On the screen, you've got a 10, 9, 8, 7, and then you start the music in this movie, and you've got Dream a Dream with God, and you've got the lights, and then, okay, stop, now we're going to worship. How are young people going to make that distinction in their minds?
The whole point is you've built them up to this, and now we're stopped, calm down, we're going to worship, yeah.
And like you said, what's going to happen then if that young person says, I like the Church of Christ. That's impressive. I'm going to go to their worship service.
Right.
And it's not going to be the popcorn.
Right. Well, to me, I think back to 1 Kings 12, where you've got the divided kingdom, and you've got Jeroboam, and he's worried that people are going to go to worship in Jerusalem, worship God at the temple, and that's going to take him out of his kingdom and down into the southern kingdom. And so he says, what I'm going to do, I'm going to do this. I'm going to set up 2 more places of worship to make it convenient. I'm going to put this beautiful golden calf there. I'm going to make worship entertaining for them and draw them there. I'm going to have incense and a whole new priesthood outside the Levitical priesthood. And all of these things we're going to do so that people don't go down and worship God, so that they stay loyal to me.
Yeah.
And it's similar to what's going on. It's not exactly what's going on, but it's very similar as this convenience.
Yeah.
They're using the same types of things to say, and again, the motivation I think is, well, we're trying to keep our kids in the church.
It reminded me of that also.
Yeah.
Word number 1 is confusing. Number 2 is inadequate. Word number 3, what was word number 3 here? I forgot now. Carnal. And then word number 4 that I want to bring up is the word absent. And what I mean by that is when you look at the New Testament, you don't find this kind of thing.
No.
In fact, in the New Testament church, they were masters at drawing people. They were masters at teaching people. I made a list of verses here, so if you'll bear with me 1 minute. Acts 20 and 20, they went from house to house teaching people. Acts 2:42, they continued steadfastly in doctrine, the Lord's Supper, and prayers. Acts 2:46, they daily ate together and they fellowshiped. Acts 4:4, many believed. Acts 5:14, multitudes were added to the Lord. Acts 6:1, disciples were multiplying. 6:7, the number of disciples multiplied. 9:31, they multiplied. 11:21, a great number turned to the Lord. 11:24, a great many people were added to the Lord. 12:24, the word of God grew and multiplied. 14:1, a great multitude of Jews and Greeks believed. 16:5, the number increased daily. 19:20, they grew mightily and prevailed. I could go on, but the point is, they grew, but you never see the shows and the music and the lights and those kind of things to draw people. Now, somebody might say, well, they didn't have those kind of things in the first century. Oh, yeah, they did.
They definitely did.
They could have done the music for sure. They could have done the light shows. If they could have done all the things, they could have replicated.
Well, if you know, I'm a history guy, study the Roman Empire and the emperors and all of that. But if you look at the pagan temples, they had all sorts of gimmicks,
yes,
to get people to come to their temples. I mean, they had statues that could talk, things that could move, light shows, all the kind of things that are now in the denominational world. Somebody very wise once said, there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
All of this has been tried before, and to solve the same types of problems, and with the same motivations, and it will have the same ending. There's no substance to it.
So the point is, they could have done it,
yes,
but they didn't.
In fact, they're distinctive for not doing it.
That's right. It is absent from the New Testament pattern.
That's right.
But when you look at the religious world around us, the idea is, let's create this emotional euphoria. Let's stir the emotions through external stimuli with the band and the screen and the lights and the fog machine, and we'll draw people through these appeals to the flesh. And some of these youth events, even in churches of Christ, it seems to me like what we're wanting to do is to say this: we can't do these things in worship, so let's do them right before worship. Let's do them right after worship, and we'll mix them, so we'll get as much of this as we can, and we'll draw the numbers like the religious world does, but then we'll say, stop, all right, let's worship. Now we'll resume. And the idea seems to be, as long as we say stop, let's worship, then it's okay.
Yeah.
But my contention is it's confusing, it blurs the lines. How do we get that straight in the eyes of our young people?
And that's not what people need. And, you know, if to use your analogy from earlier about feeding them sugar, if you just eat a diet of sugar all the time, try that for a couple of days, what are you going to be craving?
Yeah.
Vegetables, meat. You're going to be craving something with some substance to it. Well, young people in the world that I work with and that come to visit and that we have Bible studies with, they're craving the truth.
That's right.
Because the world is full of this stuff.
That's right.
Quit bringing sugar in.
That's a good point. And it goes back to my second point, and that is what we have is perfectly adequate. It's more than enough. And if you really will give the substance, the people who are really spiritually hungry, they'll come for that because they can get sugar anywhere.
That's what we're looking for, hearts with good soil. That's what we're looking for. And they want the truth.
So, number one, this is confusing. Number two, what we have is perfectly adequate. Number three, all of this is carnal. It's about fleshly appetites. Number four, it's glaringly absent from the New Testament. But let me give you one more question before we wrap up here. Do you think that there will be unintended consequences to these type events?
Yeah, I think we're already seeing some of those in the church as we see some of these children who have been to these sorts of things their whole lives for the past 10, 12 years at least. And now they're becoming youth ministers. They're introducing these things into the local congregations, things like that. But you look, you know, I think about history. Like I said, I think about Diocletian, who was an emperor who persecuted the church in the late 3rd, early 4th century. And he's persecuting Christians. And so Christians, what he did in the first wave of his persecution was he's like, I'm going to go after the leadership. And so the churches started thinking, okay, well, we need to solve this problem. Maybe Jesus, maybe God didn't know what he was doing when he set up the church. We've got to protect our leaders. Let's just have one leader over the church, one bishop, one pastor, however you want to say that. And in fact, maybe just one over several churches. And then they'll focus on him and he can kind of hide. And what were the unintended consequences of that? Well, the persecution ended, but that concept continued. And what happens? You no longer have the scriptural basis for the structure of the church. And then you get one guy over a lot, eventually one guy over all the churches. And that's apostasy. Yeah. And so the same thing is true here. You introduce these things, and sometimes they say, oh, well, technically these things aren't wrong. Okay, but what happens when you do that sort of thing? Well, that happened. There's the classic illustration of the piano. So in children's classes, we're going to add the piano just to the children's classes. It's not worship, and they don't sing very well, and it's more entertaining for them. So we'll just add that to the children. Well, those children grow up. They become preachers, deacons, elders. They roll that piano from the classroom into the church building. Yeah. And the same is true. A lot of times I feel like when we talk about this, we're talking about big youth events, and it's almost a finger pointing problem. We're saying these people are doing it, and we don't really have any influence other than to say, well, we're not going to support it. We're not going to send our youth, and we shouldn't send our youth to those types of things. But there's also a problem, I feel like, in the local church, and that we need to do the same kind of scrutiny when we're talking about things like Vacation Bible School. Are we designing our Vacation Bible School in such a way that if we have visitors come, that they're going to be very surprised if they also come to worship on Sunday?
I've seen some wild things at Vacation Bible Schools.
And I think we need to take a look at ourselves as well. As others that are running these kinds of events. But we've got to keep the focus on Christ, on what's important.
Now, with all of that said, what if someone said, well, we need to have these type events to keep our kids from leaving the church? To that, I think I would say, the church is not about pleasing us, it's about pleasing God.
That's right.
And in every age, there have been people who wanted to be entertained. There have been people who have made worship about them, not about the Lord, but that's never made it right. And if our youth leaders are telling us that this is what we've got to do to keep our kids from leaving the church, then we need new youth leaders.
That's right.
Because serving the Lord's never been about having fun. It's about the heart. It's about the sin problem. It's about sacrifice. And so what do we need to do? I would say we don't need to mix in music. We need to magnify the message.
That's right.
And we don't need gimmicks. We need the gospel. We need biblical teaching that is so plain that it wounds the conscience and heals the soul. We need Christ, not confetti. I got that out of this guy's article, but I like it. We need Christ, not confetti. And we need to stop asking what will attract people, and we need to start asking what will please the Lord.
I agree. God wants our hearts. That's bottom line. He's wanted our hearts from the Old Testament. He wants our hearts in the New Testament church. He wants us to have that kind of relationship with Him. And that's more than just based on emotion. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. You'll follow what I do. So I think that's exactly right.
Thank you, Luke. Glad to have you on the program today.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Truth on Wheels. Until next time, be faithful.